The rise of Japanese film today, such as Perfect Days, Godzilla Minus One, and Studio Ghibli movies such as Boy and the Heron and Spirited Away, actually has a darker past than you might have thought of. Japanese film starts with the silent era, and Thomas Edison's kinetoscope, which was shown in Japan a year after the famous film screening in Paris. They focused on art forms such as kabuki and kroger, which were comic-style storytellings that had a unique style of narration known as benshi. Benshis were performers who expanded on the subtitles and acted out the various roles in film.
により江戸全市民の喝采を博した異名ネズミ小僧無宿人入れ墨次郎吉がその断罪申し渡し書によれば大将名旗本をかすむること。
In 1897, the Lumiere brothers' cinematography is presented in Japan, and they are actually the first to shoot film in Japan. The French and Americans would screen short features in Tokyo during this time as well. Then, in 1899, the first Japanese documentary was made, Gishi no Todori. Fun fact, some ghost films were also made during this time, such as Bakejizo and Shina no Sose, which shows the popularity of ghost films, also known as yokai films, in Japan. In 1908, we see the first film star actor. Matsunosuke Ono, recruited by Shoujo Makino, becomes Japan's first film star. By 1926, he had appeared in over 1,000 films, mostly short films, but still, that's a lot of films. Then, in 1911, the first professional female Japanese actress, Takuko Nagai, she was employed by Americans during this time. In the 1920s, many Japanese filmmakers would visit Hollywood to study their techniques, but they also developed their own technique, jirageki, or period dramas, which is going to be important later. These films were centered around the Edo period, commonly called swordplay films, which includes what Japanese films is most known for, which are their samurai films. Later, in the 1920s, the rise of Shingeki films would also become very popular, which is a genre film that focused on dramas between common people. However, this period also saw the rise in tendency films, which lasted from about 1920s to the 1930s, which were censored films by the government that promoted left-wing politics. This won't be the first time that Japanese films were censored. This part in Japan's history is very interesting to me, which is the start of the World War II. Japan loved American culture, especially Disney, which included characters like Mickey Mouse and Betty Boop. In fact, Japan loved Mickey Mouse so much that he would be seen in many Japanese cartoons, even referencing Mickey Mouse cheering on Japanese sports. However, during the start of World War II, Japan's love for the American culture did a 180 and made a beloved character like Mickey Mouse into an evil air-raiding monster. In the cartoon, we could see Mickey Mouse air-raiding beloved characters such as Felix the Cat and Peach Boy. Japanese film was popular in Japan, however, it was never reached outside of the country. During World War II, Japan began to weaponize their directors in order to make propaganda films. Japan's approach to creating effective propaganda was to create the idea that Japan is always winning, which was highly believed, in a way, not a full lie, until 1944, in which citizens started to put two and two together, seeing more and more younger men being recruited, and their victories began to bring the enemy closer and closer. In fact, in 1944, Japan would double their propaganda to keep pushing the idea that they were still winning. In 1945, a dark time approached for Japan. In a matter of seconds, nationwide hope was destroyed. The bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima left the nation in despair. On the 15th of August, 1945, Emperor Hirohito declared Japan's surrender. This is a key point for Japanese film history because the event both ended and started Japanese cinema altogether. With the United States occupation of Japan, a period of censorship would start to ensue in Japan's history. General MacArthur was the supreme commander of the Allied power, created the General Headquarters, or, how Japan referred to it, GHQ. The GHQ would make two divisions, that being the CIE, the Civil Information and Education Division, and the CCD, the Civil Censorship Detachment, which would go on to control all of Japan's media from 1946 to 1952. These divisions, surprisingly, were not run by any directors or artists, but all run by the military. During this time, every movie in Japan had to be fully translated into English and pass through both the CIE and the CCD. During this time, the process of translating was a lot of work and money, which led many Japanese directors' careers to end. Take a quick second to think of how movies would look like in reverse. How would movies made by Walt Disney or Steven Spielberg look like, having to go through the Japanese government and being translated into the Japanese language every time? During this period, the CIE banned the following in Japanese film: nationalism, patriotism, stories promoting suicide, atomic bombs, revenge stories, all allied countries, any form of imperial propaganda, defense of war criminals, fealty or feudal thought, Mount Fuji, bowing, and katanas, which I found significantly interesting because of the way that United States went through the extent to end Japanese nationalism. In fact, in 1946, some Japanese directors would review their films and deem them taboo under the new CIE ban, leading to over 500 movies being burned and lost in history. Under the new rules, too, most movies became what is considered, in Japan, a shomangeki, which we talked about earlier being a common person drama film.
During post-war Japan, the girl, Toshiko, played by the legendary Kyoko Kagawa, focuses primarily on her mother and her hard-working personality.
Japanese film was already suppressed from outside countries, and this time, things just got harder for Japanese directors to not only make films, but to reach a global audience. This was all true until one director created a film that ended all the censorship, and it was completely by accident. Akira Kurosawa, who could easily be in a top 10 directors in a history list, created a film in 1950 called Rashomon. The story is set in the 12th century and is about a man on the edge of the life of crime, in which an incident pushes him over the brink. This film presents themes of justice, poverty, morality, and survival. The movie was screened at the Venice Film Festival in 1951 without Kurosawa's knowledge, and won the Golden Lion and the Academy Award. Because of this film, Akira Kurosawa was able to end the censorship over Japanese film, and outside countries would finally give Japanese film the recognition it deserves. After the end of the censorship, the Golden Age would begin. Many filmmakers during this time would begin to create again these big period dramas, which would display Japanese culture and film style. Studios began to rise in Japan. Since Japanese film culture loved Hollywood, Japan would create their own big studios like Warner Brothers, Paramount Pictures, 20th Century Studios, Universal Pictures, and Columbia Pictures. These studios that were created in Japan created a Big Five, which are now known as Toei, Toei, Sochiku, Kadokawa, and Daiei. The rise of the film in Japan started to take off. In fact, in 1946, the amount of movie theaters in Japan went from 1,376 to 7,457 in 1960. The golden age of Japanese cinema had very few restrictions, and many directors would start to develop a unique style. A rise in Japanese horror movies around this time would begin. I'm a huge horror movie fan myself, so when I found one of Japanese most popular horror movies, House, created in 1977, I had to watch it for myself. To my surprise, the blood and floating heads wasn't the scariest thing I found in the movie. To give some context, House is a movie that features 6 female actresses from the ages of 13 to 16, traveling to a spooky relative's house. The movie was very interesting, but towards the end, the movie took a darker turn. The movie would display full nudity of some of the girls in the movie. As disturbing as I found this, I passed this along as a cultural thing. After looking more into it, I found in an interview that some of the girls felt uncomfortable doing the nude scene, but only felt comfortable when the other actresses were willing to do it. After doing more research, I found a common practice in Japanese film. Young actresses and idols would agree to do nude scenes in their movies in order to show a level of maturity, which in turn would offer them bigger roles. This isn't the only place where I see this level of sexualization towards women in Japan. This is also seen in anime. In many of these shows, a lot of younger female characters are sexualized, and there are no laws against this because the characters are make-believe. But how does this affect young boys that these shows are targeted to? This could be the source of a major problem in Japan known as upskirting, a disgusting method of taking pictures of girls without their consents.
I have been touched a lot of times around here, and most people I know have had the same experience.
The Japanese government and law enforcement has taken measures by creating segregated trains for women. Also, fun fact, If you purchase a phone in Japan and decide you want to take a photo, a loud click noise would sound. This was made to prevent upskirting. In Japan, the age of consent has recently moved from 13 to 16. This concept might seem crazy to Americans with the age of consent being 18 here. However, it doesn't end there. In Japan, if you were between the ages of 13 to 15, you could legally consent to sexual intercourse with someone who is 5 years older than that age. I don't know much about Japanese culture, but this seems contradictory over the cultural belief that you are considered an adult when you are 20 and you could vote when you are 18. On top of that, the film rating system known as R in America is R15 in Japan, meaning that someone the age of 15 can watch movies such as 50 Shades Darker, Saw, Halloween, and John Wick. I don't know about you, but I wasn't allowed to watch any of those movies when I was 15. I did watch movies like Ponyo though. Speaking of Ponyo, Ponyo is an animated movie by Studio Ghibli, a studio that I deem responsible for the spread of serious animated movies and anime in America. A recurring theme that we keep seeing is Japan's obsession with Hollywood. American cartoons was another craze in Japan. Characters like Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat were adored, like I stated above, and they created Astro Boy, which is Japan's first anime ever. From this, anime has grown insanely popular over 2020, mainly because everyone was locked in their houses and had nothing better to do. Anime has become more easily accessible with streaming platforms such as Crunchyroll and Funimation. Netflix and Hulu have also hired companies to create their very own anime shows. Studio Ghibli is probably one of the biggest names of the anime face, with movies that have won Oscars such as recently Boy and the Heron and Spirited Away.
All right, and the Oscar goes to The Boy and the Heron.
These movies made by Studio Ghibli have ended the idea of animated movies being seen as kids' movies to American audiences and especially the Oscars. Anime has become so popular, in fact, that Anime Expo has become one of the biggest conventions in LA, and we've all heard the horror stories of the crowds at Anime Expo and the smell. In conclusion, Japan has come a long way for its film industry. If you want to watch a newer Japanese film, you should check out Perfect Days and Godzilla Minus One, which have both won Oscars. And maybe you'll take this knowledge with you as you watch those movies. Thank you.